We're in 2 Samuel 20. This is kind of the last chapter of the whole rebellion cycle that's been happening. Obviously, the rebellion from Absalom is over because Absalom is dead by this point, and David was working to pull the nation together in chapter 19. He was trying to show mercy to his enemies, not looking to make a huge big deal about everything, putting people to death, but instead trying to get people together. And this is a good thing. We talked about Mephibosheth and Ziba and how David more or less seems to throw his hands in the air and say, figure it out yourselves, split it halfway, I don't really care what happens with you. And then David working to honor the people who were still loyal to him in all of this. Barzillai in particular is a wealthy and powerful man in that critical Transjordan region. Very good to reward a man like that and to kind of solidify relations over there. But at the end of chapter 19, you will remember that there was tension, that things were not going very smoothly, that even though Judah was kind of the last ones to support David again in a reversal from what happened when David first became king, they now were hesitant. They're now the last ones, and David has to really convince them that it's a good idea for them to follow him as king. Well, David works to honor the tribe of Judah, and they are his tribe, his people, and so he uses them as part of his entourage, but there's all sorts of jealousy, all sorts of trouble in that the people of Judah get to be the ones who accompany David across the Jordan and back, and that makes the northern tribes angry because they can only see that Judah has this unfair position of influence with David, and they say, we have 10 shares in the king. We were quicker to accept him back after the rebellion with Absalom. We're told that Judah responded back even worse, and the whole point is that tensions are building, and that was the end of a chapter. Nice cliffhanger to bring us into this week. So chapter 20 is another rebellion. Are you tired of hearing about rebellions? David was probably very tired of hearing about rebellions. They keep happening. And so what rebellion begins in chapter 20 and who is responsible for it? Yeah, Sheba. Karen's got that for us. So Sheba is responsible for starting a rebellion, and who is Sheba is the little we know about him. Yeah, so he's from a tribe of Benjamin, which is, maybe just an irrelevant detail, except I think you can get echoes of the last time that the house of Benjamin was against David. Remember that Saul came from the house of Benjamin. So David has already experienced, this is, same song, different verse, basically, that, a man of the house of Benjamin, like Ishbosheth is working to unite all of Israel under his banner and to oppose David, and only the tribe of Judah is going to stay with him. This is what David has already dealt with. Even before Absalom, this is way at the beginning of his reign, but really he's just kind of looped back around. So, let's talk about this, though. Why rebellion after rebellion? Why does it seem like they're happening so quickly when David has just quelled the previous rebellion? We already said there was tension at the end of chapter 19 among the tribes. I guess kind of why so much tension? Why are things so bad in the nation? Gary, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, and you can see how that sort of thing could be spun in a way that is negative toward David. We understand, like, we know that David's purpose in fleeing was trying to limit collateral damage, to not have Jerusalem turn into a complete war zone. He's trying to spare the lives of his people. And even though, Absalom still came up against him and still there was a lot of killing, he is trying to limit it at least to the people who are actively choosing to fight and not just the civilians who are around. But yeah, that's, Absalom was loved by a lot of people. David is the one who fled Jerusalem. That can kind of be a problem in the eyes of some. What else? Well, if you want to hear my interpretation of it, I think the people involved here, Absalom, Sheba, David, it's more than about just the people, right? Like, they are kind of proxies for the regional distrust and tensions that have existed for a long time. So I've mentioned it at different times, including last week, I believe. But you have to remember those important divides within the nation of Israel. That you have the north-south divide, that Judah is kind of separated from the rest of them, not geographically separated. They do run right up against the others, but at least culturally different, and that Judah and the northern tribes do not always agree. Of course, later on, when we see the formal split happen, when the nation really becomes two nations, how does it split? As far as the tribes are. What tribes are in the southern kingdom? Judah and Benjamin, yeah. Which is kind of interesting that Benjamin ends up going along with Judah, considering how much Benjamin has been against Judah in so much of this. And things can change like that. But still, even then, it's two tribes against 10 who are really rebelling against the rest. So that's a problem. The other split is the west of a Jordan, east of a Jordan split. And so, these are not formal splits in the sense that they are different nations. The north-south one will be later, but these are more cultural divides. And people don't always trust those who are on the other side. And so think about some of the long-standing tensions that exist in our country between the north and the south, right? Like, the stories of why there's tension in north and south, it goes back long before any of us were born, right? Okay? Yeah, Simeon is sort of absorbed into Judah in some way. That gets a little bit complicated there, but yes, Simeon's an edge case as well. So this is, as much as we have been talking about the story of David, and we have identified that it's David's sins that have created a lot of these problems. Absalom rebelled because David was unwilling to restrain him, was unwilling to restrain, it seems, any of his children. And why is he unwilling to restrain them? Well, he seems to have lost some moral authority with them. And why has he lost, this whole chain that we've been talking about. That goes all the way back to Bathsheba. And you see the unfortunate snowballing of events in the story of David's life. But it would be a mistake to attribute everything happening in Israel to just the story of David's life. There are other things at play here. And I think the reason why this rebellion can happen again so quickly and along these similar lines, that once again it's the northern tribes that are rising up against Judah and rising up against David, is because those tensions already exist, and they have for a long time. And so you have all this built up, and all it takes is a spark, and the spark makes the whole thing go. Now, in this case, Sheba is the spark. He blows the trumpet. He says, "We have no portion in David, and we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel." So he's calling on the nation to rally around him and to resist David, to rebel against David. And it seems that he is successful. So keep that in mind. These big geopolitical things and even just cultural things are important, and they're going to influence what happens as we go forward as well. You'll see that a lot more as you get into Kings, for sure, where there's eventually this formal split. Remember, it's only really the span of 3 kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, that reign over a united kingdom. And Solomon is the one who has the most peaceful time with that. But it all falls apart relatively quickly. And this goes back, I think, as we followed the chain from as far back as the people in the wilderness, and even as they're going into Canaan and fighting throughout the books of Joshua and dealing with things in Judges, they have never really solidified themselves as a united nation. They are still viewing themselves as individual tribes with stronger loyalty to the tribes than they have to the nation as a whole. Anything else in the first few verses? Before we talk some more about Sheba and how this goes, we have kind of an aside here of when David comes back to Jerusalem. What does he do with the 10 concubines that he had left behind when he previously fled Jerusalem? Aaron. Yeah, so they're not going to be concubines anymore. They're going to it even says they're put in a house under guard. Sounds a lot like a house arrest to me. But there is some kindness here too, right? In that all their needs are taken care of. But David doesn't go into them as concubines anymore. And that seems to, it says that this lasts all the way until the day of their death. So this probably feels very weird to us. Why is this, okay? That could very well be part of the problem there, although David has multiple wives, and the lineage is only going to go through one of them in any case. But yeah, that could absolutely be part of it. Lisa? Yeah. Yeah. So so what Lisa said there is, one comment she saw was that David couldn't just let these women go out and marry, other people, that would be a threat to his rule. And that is absolutely true. We have a very hard time reading all of this from our 21st century perspective. Ida, go ahead. No.
I'm sure what you're going to say is better than what I'm
No,
going to say.
please do. Yeah, go for it. It offends you? Yeah.
And I, he shouldn't have married, he shouldn't have married in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's just, I just, my previous Christian parents were raised socially and even though they kept saying they just couldn't true.
No, they are. Yeah, so let me clarify that when I say we have a hard time understanding this from our 21st century perspective, that's not me saying that this is necessarily a good thing that's happening here. No, I'm offended by it as well. There are some ways to explain why David is doing what he's doing, that they would be sensible actions to him. That doesn't necessarily mean they are good actions, but at least sensible in his mind and sensible to his time. That is what would be expected. As Lisa mentioned, the concubines are considered to be an expression of a king's power. That having these concubines, having that harem, the abundance of wives and concubines, shows that you are a king. Now, that's never really been something that God is all that pleased with. You see, in some ways, some overlooking of that, but the multiple marriage thing is not originally part of God's plan. Ida?
Showing him to be a king. I don't care what word about that.
Right.
It's what makes the marriage.
Yeah. Right.
But that's me, I mean, I'm sure I am.
Yeah, this is one example of David doing the things that would be expected for a king in that region of the world and in that time to show his power, but that we can identify, from a somewhat removed state as really not being a very good thing to do. Eric. Yeah. 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 That, I think, is the crux of the matter. If you didn't hear what was said there, saying that there are long-term consequences to not obeying God, to sinning against God, and that, I think, is the biggest takeaway from this. The reason why, and we're going to do this chain of events thing again, right? The reason why David feels that he can't have these women as concubines anymore is because Absalom had taken them for himself during the rebellion, and that undercut David, but now he's going to set them aside. Well, the reason why Absalom is able to take them for himself in this rebellion is, again, we're linking this all back to David's previous sins. He took Bathsheba for himself, who was another man's wife, and one of the punishments for that was God said, you are going to see your wives taken from you and slept with in the light of the sun by other men. And that is fulfilled through what Absalom, his own son, does to his concubines in this rebellion. The whole thing is gross and awful. And also, these women's lives are permanently affected, permanently damaged because of the actions of people around them. They have no control over what is happening to them here. They are being used and manipulated and traded as objects and set aside, not even really as people, but set aside just as objects that are no longer able to fulfill the purpose of kingly power that David needs. So I'm not all that interested in trying to justify David's actions here, because like Ida said, there's a lot that's really not great about it and is offensive to us. And I think this is one of the examples where being removed from that culture and time actually helps us to see why that is damaging and not a very good thing for him to do. But the main takeaway here is that the ripple effects of David's sin continue to go out. That awful sin with Bathsheba has just spread farther and farther and farther, hurting all sorts of people, hurting the nation in ways that I guarantee you he never imagined as he was trying to pursue her and taking her for himself. Now, is it fair to pin every last, droplet of guilt upon David in this? Like, other people are responsible for their actions in this too. Absalom's responsible for his own things, but David is responsible for the influence that he's had in all of this. He does bear guilt in the chain of events that has happened. So I do believe that David is trying to do here what he can for these women, trying to treat them well, trying to solve this problem as he sees it. But this is also not really one of David's, shining moments. All right, let's go back to Sheba. So how does David prepare to fight Sheba? Lisa. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so he had already made Amasa his general. That was Absalom's general before. We talked about that last week, why David did that in an effort to try to unite people. Clearly, that has only partially worked because there is another rebellion happening there. But okay, Amasa, you gather up as many people as you can in Judah, and you've only got 3 days to do it because we need this fight to happen quickly. We're seeing, I think, the strategy play out that Ahithophel had advised Absalom to do when David was fleeing. Go and attack him quickly before he has a chance to fortify himself, before he has a chance to gather too many people, and you can end this before it's even started. David is going to do essentially the same thing. Sheba is trying to gather people. Well, let's not sit around and let him gather up thousands and thousands of people. Let's get this thing done with as quickly as possible. So Amasa, you've got 3 days. Find your men and let's go and let's fight Sheba. But 3 days pass, and Amasa is nowhere to be found. Now that seems a little bit troubling. And I don't know, if you're David, what are all the different things you could be thinking here? Lisa? It's not impossible, right? Maybe he's just joined Sheba. I mean, his last position was as general for the previous rebel. Maybe he's just going to go join Sheba. Now David's in a lot of trouble. Now, to be fair, it doesn't say that David thought that necessarily, but he could have, and it wouldn't have been much of a stretch for him to think that. Regardless, something is wrong. Lisa? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, David realizes that things are unraveling, and he is once again in danger of losing the nation. He does say that to Abishai. Now Sheba will do us more harm than Absalom. I think David is realizing that there's a large threat here, and realizing that these tensions are about more than just Absalom. If he probably already knew that, but realizing that it is not so simple to unite 12 tribes of people together and to get them all under one banner. So Amasa's not come back after 3 days. Something is wrong, one way or another. David does not know exactly what has happened, but he's got to deal with it even still. So he appoints Abishai to take whatever men he has and to go and fight Sheba before he can get fortified. So is anyone else surprised it's not Joab? I forget who made the comment last week. Somebody last week identified that when Amasa was made general, we have like these political reasons for David to want to do that. But also, David might have been quite upset with Joab. Maybe this was Aaron. I don't remember who it was. That Joab getting demoted might have served David's purposes as well, because Joab killed Absalom, and David had explicitly ordered him not to do that. And so, it doesn't seem like there's enough information, so you think, well, maybe it's just more politically advantageous, maybe not. But now Amasa is gone, and he needs to, like David's scrambling. But he does not turn to Joab, who has been his general for a long time. I do think that's meaningful. I do think that that reveals that David has something against Joab and is not totally willing to see him as general. It's reading between the lines somewhat, but Joab was a trusted leader for a long time, and to not turn to him does seem a little bit strange otherwise. Of course, the other reason why he doesn't turn to Joab may be because Joab is not there quite right now. Joab is up to some other things. Let's see. What happened to Amasa? Joab kills him. More echoes of things we've talked about before, right? This whole story is, same song, different verse. Because we've been through this before, where Joab kills someone, but there is a little bit of a difference this time. So he had killed Absalom, and that made sense to some degree, even though David had told him not to. You can kind of construct this argument that Absalom needed to die, that David was too weak to do it because he's his father, and Joab's making the hard decision for him. Maybe that's not the best approach for Joab, but it's at least defensible, and you can see where he's going with that. Then previously with Abner, again, you can construct an argument where Abner is a spy. Abner is trying to undermine David, and he's not really there to join him, and so Joab is going to do the hard thing for David and just kill Abner. Of course, that was actually not the case. Abner really had joined up with David, and David was not pleased that Joab killed him. But again, you can kind of construct this argument that Joab is trying to do what's best for David. Lisa? Yeah. 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 So I want to try to present an argument here that this case is a little bit different, and you can decide whether you agree. It is left a little bit murky here, because there are a couple different ways you can interpret that, and that is probably the way Joab would like for it to be interpreted, and it might even be what he really thinks. We are not told exactly what Joab thinks here. Now, my first question is, why does Amasa not come back within the 3 days? My read of it is Joab kills him in those 3 days. It's not given in that order there, but remember, very often in these historical accounts in the Bible, you have kind of a summary of events first, and then you have more details that come after. And so if you read it as Amasa's been gone for 3 days, Then Abishai is appointed a general. He and Joab go out. They happen to run across Amasa, and Joab kills Amasa. Then, yes, you can construct that same argument for Joab that, maybe he's got these big questions. Amasa, you've gone rogue. You've not come back in the 3 days. What are you up to? Maybe you are rebelling against David. And if that really is the sequence of events there, then yeah, I think you can probably try to give Joab some benefit of the doubt like you've done in the others. You don't have to justify his actions, but at least understanding how he could believe that that's the best thing for David. If, however, we use this as a better way to explain why Amasa doesn't come back in 3 days, as I believe is probably more likely, then if Joab has intercepted Amasa, then he's looking for an opportunity to just get back in power. And there's going to be another piece of evidence a little bit later that may be what Joab is up to. But it does help explain why Amasa's not come back in 3 days. He can't because he's dead. Now, David is never going to know the exact order that things happened. We're not even totally sure that David knows who kills Amasa. It's never said that David knows what happens to him, that David knows whether he's dead or alive. That is kind of pushed off to the side as irrelevant detail. But if it happens in that order, well, then Joab seems to be more of a schemer here. And we have seen Joab scheme before. He can be quite crafty when he needs to be. There are pros and cons to both of those arguments. And like I said, I'm going to give you one more piece of evidence for that version of events a little bit later, with the way that Joab is kind of rallying the troops. But either way, what you see is Joab once again finding himself back in power, getting himself back in power, and either doing what he thinks is best for David, or in this case, doing what he thinks is best for himself so that he can do what is best for David. I don't think we need to believe that that Joab doesn't care about David. He clearly does. There's too much evidence of that. All throughout, that he cares about David, he cares about David doing well, but I'm not so sure that he is prepared to just take his demotion quietly. Okay, so think about that. Well, do you have any follow-up comments on that first before we move on? Does that make sense, Lisa? Yeah. 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 So it doesn't talk about yeah. So it does talk about Joab's men being there with Abishai from the beginning of Abishai going out. It's hard to know the exact order of things that happen here because these things aren't always given chronologically to us. They're given in the order that David knows about them or in like thematic order. It can be strange that way. I'm not going to push back so hard as to tell you that it's impossible because it clearly is possible. Right. And both of those versions fit within Joab's character, different sides of his character, because it's totally believable that Joab would do what he thinks is going to help David, but that David's too weak to do. Like, he's definitely done that before. And we've seen that Joab is very untrusting of the people who come in who used to be against David, like Abner. I can totally believe that he would not trust Amasa and that it would be about more than just the demotion. Yeah. Right. So neither one is impossible, and neither one is going to change like the ultimate meaning of what's happening here. So, we're kind of exploring some options. Sometimes there is some murkiness in here with the motivations of people, and that's okay. We don't always have everything totally fleshed out for us. And the murkiness is often meant to reveal how, from David's point of view, it can be difficult to know who is really loyal to him. This is kind of the same conversation that we had with Mephibosheth and Ziba. Like, you can make an argument either way, and I've got, on that one, I feel even more sure, like, I really think that Ziba's the schemer there, but it's not impossible that he's not. And the murkiness in that story was kind of to show how hard things are for David. So you can look at this event that way as well, that it's very difficult for David to know exactly what is happening. Aaron? Yeah. 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 Yeah, and mainly the reason why we're talking about it is not so that we can like definitively say exactly what happened, but this follows the same theme that this whole like narrative arc has followed of loyalty. Who is loyal to David? Who can he trust? Who is really on his side? And we've had several events happen that are murky like that, where David doesn't exactly know. And so he is not always able to make a totally informed decision. He has to make some leap of faith in thinking, either with Mephibosheth and Ziba, I don't care anymore, figure it out yourselves, or with Joab, he can't really do that. Clearly, and we'll get there, but clearly he believes whatever Joab tells him, because Joab ends up being the commander again, legitimately. I don't know, go ahead, Mark. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 Mhm. Yeah. And all of those traits make him a great general, clearly. They've also caused some problems, too. And that's the case for a lot of character traits that a person might have. They can be used in good and bad ways. Okay? Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very believable thing for Joab to do. It's hard to totally know everyone's motivations in this, but it is going to progress. Let's talk about this. Well, no, before we get there, excuse me. So Joab kills Amasa. He does it kind of like he kills Abner, in a deceitful way of, he pulls Abner aside to talk to him. He's going in for a greeting, going in for the bro hug, or the kiss, as it says here, to Amasa, but then, stabs him and kills him. It is kind of a quick, efficient, and dirty kill. Aaron? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Let me clarify what I said then. When I say quick, I mean there's not a duel between him and Amasa. Like it's quick in that he is incapacitated. Yes, the death takes quite a while here. He's left suffering on the ground for a long time, and they just kind of pull him off to the side, just into the field there because he's in the way. This is about as dishonorable as what they did with Absalom and just throwing him in a pit. They're not giving any honor to him, and I think that kind of speaks to the way that Joab looks at him. Lisa? Yeah. Right. Yeah, at first you maybe want that for the message, and then now it's let's get him out of the way. And then that statement, you've got that messenger there who's calling out, saying, everyone, let me get the exact words right here. Verse 11, whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. Which, is technically treason, right? Because Joab's been relieved of his command. So, you really can't say that, actually. Joab has just sort of inserted himself. Really the right thing here, because, who was put in command after Amasa's gone? Yeah, right. Abishai's brother. So, it really should have been, if you're for David, follow Abishai. That is a defensible thing to say. But following Joab, Abishai kind of gets pushed off to the side here. Because Joab is going to find himself in power once again. And it's like Mark was saying, just Joab rising to the top. This is the piece of evidence that I think helps the case of Joab doing something a little bit more than just whatever is good for David. He is trying to reestablish himself in power. Now, does he also think that's what's best for David? Quite possibly, and maybe probably even. But he will still find a way to get himself in power as well. So how does the battle between Sheba and Joab progress and end? It's not much of a battle, which I think shows that as Sheba's trying to gather all Israel, he doesn't do a very good job of gathering all Israel. This rebellion has the chance to become something very dangerous, but actually is kind of fizzling out. And part of that's due to the strategy of let's go deal with Sheba quickly before he can get everyone there. So no, it's not much of a battle. They get them pinned into the city of Abel, and there's a siege happening, and they feel pretty confident about their power because they're not just waiting them out. The ESV says they're battering down the walls to throw it down. It talks about a siege mound and some other translations. They're going to take this city by force. That's the other thing. Yeah. So we've got another wise woman here who calls down wanting to talk to Joab. She's begging for mercy, saying Abel has this long history of peace and diplomacy, and why destroy the city? And Joab says, well, my beef isn't really with Abel, it's with Sheba. And she's like, oh, okay. Well, we can solve that real quickly. And, Joab says, deliver him. She says, you'll see his head shortly. And they go and kill him and throw his head over the wall, and that's that. That's really all that happens in that battle, and it's over. And yeah, as we talked about, Joab, just nothing really happens to him. After the rebellion, he's back in power again. David believes, apparently, whatever story he's been told about the events there, and everything just kind of goes back to normal. All right, thanks. Next week, chapter 21. The last few chapters will be some assorted events from David's life, kind of no longer in chronological order, but we'll look at 21. Thanks.